Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrived by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 211, we sit down with Peter and Deborah Carroll, the longtime owners of Lenz Winery in Peconic. Their story on the North Fork begins in the late 1980s, when the region's wine industry was still young and full of possibility. In 1988, they purchased Lenz, taking a leap of faith at a time when only a handful of vineyards existed. Over the years, they built a team rooted in consistency and craft, from the arrival of winemaker Eric Fry in 1989 to the decades-long dedication of vineyard manager Sam McCullough. That continuity, along with the shared philosophy of low-intervention winemaking and patience in the cellar, helped shape Lenz into one of the region's most enduring and quietly influential wineries. In our conversation, we talk about the early days, the breakthroughs that define their approach, and the deep archive of wines they've curated over the nearly 4 decades. We also discuss the next generation of the winemaker, Thomas Spotteck, carrying the torch, and reflect on how the North Fork's wine community has evolved from a pioneering experiment to a vibrant, interconnected landscape. And of course, we'll explore what Peter and Deborah hope for the future, for Lenz, for the region, and for the place they've called home for so many years. So I hope you enjoy episode 211 with Peter and Deborah Carroll. This episode was recorded August 4th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really great to have you both on today.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And so, if possible, could both of you give a little introduction about yourself, even where you were born and raised and what you were doing before coming to the North Fork?
Sure. My name is Deborah Carroll, and I grew up in Yorktown Heights, New York, which is in Upper Westchester. I first came to this city after college for a job, and Peter and I raised our family in New York City. I worked in 2 different industries. I started out in the fashion industry. I worked for 15 years. We had 3 children. Subsequently, I worked at a school, the Chapin School, which is an all-girls school, K through 12 in the city, and I worked in admissions there for 21 years before retiring out here during COVID.
Yeah, I'm Peter Carroll. I grew up in England. I was born in 1949. I was a baby boomer. And I visited the U.S. a few times before moving here. I took a year off between high school and university before gap years were even a thing. And by a coincidence, I ended up in the Napa Valley, which will turn out to be relevant later. But later, I came here to work in 1974 and declined an offer from my employer, Chase, to return to London, at which point they basically fired me. And I learned the critical distinction between being an illegal alien and a non-legal alien. I was a non-legal alien. Anyway, Deborah and I met in 1979 at a discotheque in Remsenburg, of all things. I say of all things because I can't dance. I have 2 left feet. But at the time we met, I was in the process of looking to buy a house, which we did in September of 79. And actually, the winery story starts there, but I'll stop for now.
Okay. Yes. And were you living in New York City area at that point? But before you came out to the North Fork, were you visiting the east end of Long Island even before then, even the South Fork or North Fork?
Yeah, like a lot of New Yorkers in that era, we lived in Manhattan. And we rented places out in the Hamptons. Mm-hmm. And, and then me buying the house in 79 was an end to the summer rental environment, and then we had our own house there at that time.
Mm-hmm. And what did you think of the North Fork at that time when you came out?
We learned about the North Fork because we were really into windsurfing, and we used to come up to the North Fork to do different regattas and things, and we loved it up here. It was just so beautiful and so different from the South Fork, and we were much more comfortable in this area. Also, we saw farms and vineyards going in, and that's what kind of piqued our interest, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, I had ended up in the Napa Valley back in 1968, 70, 71, and I'd worked out there in the vineyards, technically illegally. And so when I saw vineyards out here on the North Fork, I immediately looked and thought, those are vineyards. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And I managed to find somebody who knew a bit about it, asked them all the sort of basic questions. How much does an acre of land cost? How many vines do you put in each acre? How much do the vines cost? How many tons of grapes can you get? Work through very superficially the economics of owning a vineyard and ultimately a winery. With the benefit of hindsight, of course, all the numbers were completely wrong. But we eventually sold the house in West Hampton in '83. We only owned it for 4 years, but it doubled in value. That was a time of very high inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we netted a profit of about $125,000,
wow.
which seemed astronomical.
We were rich.
Yeah, we were rich beyond their wildest dreams. And so we used that to buy, to put a down payment on the purchase of a 33-acre vineyard up on Oregon Road, which we still own.
Mm-hmm. And did you think at that time you really wanted to get into the wine industry at that time, or was that as like a new venture?
What were we thinking?
We were pretty naive. But obviously, if you buy land and plant vines, you're pretty locked in. What we hadn't thought through completely was how we would become a winery.
Mm-hmm.
So we tentatively brought in an architect who advised us on how we might put a winery building on the land up on Oregon Road. But at around that time, it seemed like, well, that was nice, but it was going to cost a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And at about that time, I heard that Peter and Patricia Lenz were selling the Lenz Winery. So I went to see Peter, and the short version is we negotiated an agreement under which I leased all of Lenz from him with an option to buy. And so that was 1988. And then after about 4 years, we bought him out. And so then we owned the Oregon Road vineyard and the Lenz Winery and its vineyard on Route 25.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is history.
As we say.
And that was you bought the Lenz Winery in 1988, and that was 10 years after it was founded. But even at that time in 1988, what was going on in the wine scene at that time? Were there still other ones popping up, or at that point ones were popping up already in the 79, early 80s?
I think when we took over, I can't remember the exact numbers, but there were probably 10 or 12 established wineries. And I don't think that many new ones appeared in the next few years. There was later, relatively speaking, an explosion in the number of vineyards and wineries.
Yeah, at that time it was about 10, I'd say.
Yeah, and I can't remember the
Pellegrini,
yeah.
Peconic.
I think Peconic was there. Yeah, of course they were, yeah.
Quarry Creek, no.
Yeah, I think they were there too.
And maybe a few that aren't around anymore, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. Oh, Palmer was there, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they were on the order of 10 or 12. And, we could have a meeting of the Long Island Wine Council in a relatively small room. And there was, of course, the one on the South Fork, Bridgehampton Winery.
And La Reve.
Oh, right, La Reve. That came a little bit later, I think, yeah.
And just getting started, what were some of your plans in terms of even hiring people, or was there already a staff there at Lenz?
There was. What happened when we took over was the winemaker at Lenz at the time was a guy called Gary Galleron. And if you go to the Napa Valley, there's a road right in the middle that runs east-west across the valley called Galleron Lane or something. So the Gallerons are a Napa Valley family. Anyway, he quit. He basically said, time for me to go back to California. So I had to find a winemaker. The vineyard manager, whose name is going to escape me.
Jeff Breen,
that's right. He stayed on for a year or so. But in the spring of 89, in April, Eric Fry joined. One of the people who stayed on was Tom Morgan, who was in charge of sales under Peter and Pat Lenz. So Eric joined us in April and immediately started having some difficulties with the vineyard manager. And then in November of that year, I persuaded Sam McCullough to join us. And so for a while, if you remember, when the New York Yankees did really, really well around just before and after the years 2000, they used to refer to the core four. So for Lenz, the core four were Tom Morgan, Sam McCullough, Eric Fry, and me. and we stayed together for, a
long time.
Yeah. Like 20 plus years.
And we couldn't have done it without all of their help.
No,
I mean,
because I was working full time in the city, so I needed people who could just basically run the place while we were away.
And what were some of those? I mean, you mentioned hiring some of these people, but what were some of the breakthroughs or standouts from those early years of getting the winery going?
Well, hiring Eric was pivotal.
Sam.
And Sam, for sure, yeah.
And Sam's still with you.
He actually sort of semi-retired.
Only just semi-retired.
Okay.
He's working through this year with us, and he'll be fully retired as of about February next year. The other thing, though, this is a bit technical, but in the first year or two, when Eric was the winemaker, he noticed in the winemaking process that there was something funny going on. I won't bore you with the details, but there was lots of potassium in the
soil or
in the juice.
Oh, the juice.
And he did a lot of research, and he found that there was an issue. The soils out here are very acidic. They're sandy, and they're quite acidic. And it turns out that in our kind of soil, among all the various minerals, one of the many present is aluminum. Now, aluminum is not toxic to vines unless the soil is extremely acidic. So because our soils were acidic and often had been potato farms where you want an acidic soil, the aluminum was in effect attacking the roots of the grapevines. The vines, as a defense mechanism, were aggressively taking up potassium from the soil. So the soils had become potassium deficient because the vines were taking up all the potassium. Anyway, it's all very technical, but the solution was to de-acidify the soils, to raise the pH. And you do that cheaply by spreading lime on the soil, which is a very common farming practice. However, if you put lime on the surface, it takes years for it to go down even a few inches. So we devised a system, in addition to putting lime on the top, of cutting it down into the soil. And it took us 3 years of doing that, and we completely fixed the problem. We did that by around 93, at which point we started making wines that got a lot of recognition, like the Merlot from the 1993 vintage, which was a very good vintage. Suddenly people said, wow, these wines are actually pretty good. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that early days was first recognizing and then fixing this particular problem. Now,
was a turning point.
Yes, all the vineyards out here have now recognized and fixed that problem. But back in 89, 90, 91, Eric Fry was the guy who figured the problem out, and Sam was the guy who executed the solution in the vineyard. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty exciting in a way, although it was alarming first to see what the problem was, and then very satisfying to solve it.
Yes. And did you have a wine tasting room at that point?
Yes. Peter and Pat Lenz had created a tasting room, which, if you go to Lenz today, is the same tasting room. Mm-hmm. But it's been completely changed. Mm-hmm. To be honest, the number of people who would visit a winery and taste wine on a July Saturday back then was 10 to 25 people. And nowadays, Lenz is not even probably the most visited, but we may get 100, 200, probably more, and some of the wineries probably get hundreds of visitors on a summer Saturday. And that's been a big change, because I think when we started, we didn't really think of retail traffic as the heart of the business. Mm-hmm. I was very naive in many ways, but I thought if we made sensational wine, then Robert Parker, are you familiar with him?
No.
Robert Parker is the founder of a journal called The Wine Advocate. It's not a magazine. It doesn't take advertising. And all they do is taste wine and write up the notes and give the scores out of 100. Back then, if Robert Parker gave your wine a score above 95, you had, people would
find you.
Yeah. So I thought, well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to make wines with scores in the 90s, and then people will come. We'll be on allocation. Mm-hmm. And if you access their website now, you'll find that we've actually gotten a lot of wines in the 90s from the Wine Advocate. But in these intervening 35, 40 years, so have a lot of other wineries. So the science of growing grapes and making wine has improved across the board and around the world. Anyway, to come back to the commercial aspect of it, it's not enough to make a wine that gets a 95 anymore. Maybe 100 would really crack the code. But no, you really have to sell wine directly to consumers for success.
But also back in the early days, when people came to visit a tasting room, the tastings were free. You'd walk up to the bar, it was free. We didn't have any tables in the tasting room. We didn't have bar stools, nothing like that. And Eric, our winemaker, actually dissuaded us from putting any bar stools in because he didn't want to have to talk to too many people. And so people would just pop in, they'd taste some wine, and then maybe buy some and then go.
Which is odd, because he used to work for Robert Mondavi in the Napa Valley. I mentioned that I was there in 68. When I was in the Napa Valley in 68, I think there were a total of 13 wineries up and down the valley. There was Robert Mondavi. I think there was like C.K. Mondavi. There was the Christian Brothers. There was Louis Martini, and there were a few others. Now, of course, there are, I don't know how many, but at least 100 probably in the Napa Valley. But the Napa Valley in 68 was somewhat like the North Fork in 88. About the same number of wineries.
But I think other people have even mentioned it's just getting people to taste the wine out here to get a feel for it in the beginning. And there was probably some biases or in terms of what people thought of Long Island wine back then, and
There still are.
there still are bias.
But the other thing is, the truth is, for the first several years, the wines weren't particularly good.
Okay.
They really weren't.
Yeah, it was just trying to.
Yeah, it was just getting going.
Yes.
I think the 1988 vintage was a good year.
Mm-hmm.
So some good wines were made that year.
Mm-hmm.
But then we all had this soil issue. But if you look, starting around 93, things started to improve. Now, I believe, the average quality is much higher than it was then. And the best are substantially better. But there's still prejudice.
Yes.
I mean, we eat out a lot of restaurants on the North Fork, and we belong to the local country club. And you look at the wine list, there's hardly any
Local
Long Island wines,
Long Island.
and none of ours, I think one of ours or something, But
Yeah.
you try not to be miffed about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's, we spent last Thanksgiving in Rome. You go to a restaurant in Rome, the wines are all Italian. We spent a period of time in March in Paris. You go to a restaurant in Paris, all the wines are French.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a restaurant on the North Fork, and all the wines are, all kinds of things, but very few. I mean, there are exceptions. There are some restaurants that make an effort to find and put in their cellar local wines. But I don't think there's one that only serves Long Island wines.
Mm-hmm. But you've described even your approach in the cellar as a low intervention, a kind of less is more style. What does that look like in practice, and why is that important?
Well, first of all, let me say that I don't want to sound too cynical, but all wineries say that. And mostly they mean it, but it's also one of the things that you say. So what you don't want to be doing is using a lot of mechanical pumps, for example, to move wine around for convenience. You basically want to just let the biology do its thing and the chemistry do its thing without a lot of intervention. It also means you try to grow the grapes in the vineyard such that when you pick them, they don't need intervention. So you want the sugars high enough that you don't have to add sugar. You need the acids where they are so you don't have to add acid. It's like, it's just an attempt to let things be in balance.
Mm-hmm. And I think Eric once talked about avoiding chateau cash flow, the temptation to sell wines before they're ready.
Yeah.
Why was that so central to your approach, even taking that to heart?
Well, chateau cash flow, as it implies, is a situation. Well, let me back up. People sometimes ask me about the economics of the wine business. In fact, we were at a cocktail party yesterday and somebody asked, and I said, well, the problem with the wine business is that it is both capital intensive and labor intensive. Mm-hmm. You look at a lot of other businesses and they can be one or the other, but making wine is capital intensive because you need the land, the vines, the vineyard
machinery,
the winery equipment. And then it's labor intensive because you have to work on the vines essentially every day of the year. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a wine making staff and you have to have tasting room staff. So, it's both. Where was I going with this?
The economics. Chateau cash flow.
Oh, yeah, so chateau cash flow. So, and then the time is another factor. So when you first plant a vineyard, you don't even really get any grapes for 4 years, which means you don't get any wine for 5 to 6 years. Mm-hmm. So at that stage, whoever started the winery is saying, I need to sell something to get cash in. So there's a temptation to rush the wines out of the door in order to raise cash. So that becomes chateau cash flow where you're rushing. So since we were effectively subsidizing the winery in the early days, Eric would argue, let's not rush the wines into the market. So certain wines like Gewürztraminer, it's a rarity of a white wine that you shouldn't release too young. And on the reds, especially from a good vintage, he would always advocate holding the wines back. As soon as he bottled a wine, he would say, well, it has bottle shock. It'll take at least a year, before you can even think about releasing it. And if it was from a good vintage, like a 93, 95, 97, 2000, he would argue we should hold it back until it was ready. There was that California winery that had the cliched advertisement. No wine.
No good wine before it's time.
Yeah, we will sell no wine before it's time. Or Eric was sort of like that. Chateau Cashflow was his
cliche.
Yes. And then do you even have, you probably built a large archive of wines, reds going back to the late 80s. Do you revisit some of those older bottles, and what stands out to you?
Well, we do. We have. We're fortunate to have a big resource of our library wines, which we are very proud of, and we have different tastings from time to time where we offer, people opportunities to come and taste those. We recently did something you can maybe talk about.
Yeah, the library though goes. We literally have wines that go back to '88, but more realistically, in terms of what are the good ones, we have wines from the 93 vintage, some of them in magnums. We even have a couple of double magnums. So we have 93. I think we're out of the 97, but we have a fair amount still of the 2000, 2001, 2002, 2007, 2010, 2013, and our current vintage of old vines reds are the 2015s. So even the current vintages, going back to Chateau Cashflow, are
10 years old.
10 years old. And we did, Deborah just alluded to it, we did a tasting recently, and we had a good crowd of about 20 people who really knew their wine, and they were amazed, actually, first that we have these older wines, but also at how well they last. Now, I will be the first to admit, if we had those wines here, if we opened a 93, compared it to, say, a 2000, you would know that the 93 was past its peak. But it's still good, and it's still quite interesting. The more general, from a commercial point of view, I think what's interesting, I don't think anybody else has that sort of library of wines, and it's all Eric's fault. It's Chateau Cashflow. But now it's like an asset. We have this rich library of older fine reds.
And even looking at the winery today, or the as the vines have probably somewhat matured, do you think you're getting a different type of taste, or even with the temperature, the difference in temperature today compared to the 80s? Or some people have said we can create more of a old world type wine that might not be able to be produced in, say, some parts of France.
Well, the grapes are very mature. They're one of the most mature grapes out on Long Island. So,
well, yeah, that's true. But I think that's a bit like the non-interventionist people say that. I think the bigger thing is there have been huge advances in the understanding of how to grow grapes. So vineyard management, viticulture, the science and the practice of that has really improved. So personally, I don't think the climate has changed at all. What I do think has happened is that we can get more out. Now, our climate year to year is extremely varied, so you have to think in terms of
10 years.
Averages. But if you picked this year and the last 4 years, like last year was terrific, year before was kind of bad, and if you think about how well you can grow grapes given our inherently varied year-to-year weather, what you can get out of it today, given the vineyard management is so much better than it was 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That, yes, the age of the vines makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the reality is it's the vineyard management that's improved a lot, which means now Long Island wines are, on average, really quite good, where in the late 80s, even the early 90s, they were okay, rather than really quite good.
Yes. And have you noticed any other changes in the wine region out here as a whole for the region? What else has changed?
See a lot more Porsches.
Oh, gosh. Well, the North Fork has changed tremendously over the past 10, 20 years. Yeah,
Yes.
Definitely an influx of people who are interested in buying property, spending money out here, which is good for the wine business.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think a lot of things changed during COVID for us. When COVID first hit, I think we were all panic-stricken and thought, oh, God, this is the end. And then, in fact, it was actually some of our best years because people couldn't fly to Europe. They couldn't travel as they had planned, so they could get in a car and drive out east. They could social distance in our courtyard, have a glass of wine, which helped get you through COVID a lot. And so we had a lot of traffic that came through, and a lot of people had an opportunity to get to know the North Fork in a way that they hadn't before. So I think that was kind of a boost for our business then, getting the name recognition out there.
Yes. The people have mentioned that with just during COVID, they felt an uptick in business.
Definitely. But to go back to your broader question about change, until 5 years ago, we lived in the city and we came out and stayed weekends and holidays and summers out here. So we've always felt a little bit like, well, we're not native North Forkers for sure. But back in the day, let's say in the 90s, a high percentage of the vehicles, the cars, only had one headlight. And so it became a family joke. You'd see a car somewhere with one headlight and you'd say, it's from the North Fork. Roughly at the same time, or a little bit later, there was a series of letters in the Suffolk Times, and people would complain about people from up island coming into the region with their fancy ways. And they always referred to them as Lexus drivers. It seems quaint now, but people thought that driving a Lexus was the epitome of snobbish luxury. And that was the basis of my wisecrack about you see a lot more Porsches. You know, we rarely go to the South Fork. I almost never go. Deb goes occasionally. But you go to the South Fork and you see all these ritzy, fancy cars. You know, you never used to see that on the North Fork. Now, say everyone, I'll see a Porsche, I'll see the odd Ferrari, and I think, they must be visiting from South
From the South Fork.
Also, driving out east on a Friday night, you'd get to exit 70 and everybody would go off. Yeah. And we would be the only car heading out to the end. And now it's completely different.
Yeah, now probably you get to exit 70 on the LIE coming east, and the majority of the cars, 60%, stay on the Riverhead arm, while the others go down to the Hamptons.
Yeah.
But that's, as Deb said, if you go back to the 90s,
that wasn't the case.
No. So they'd all get off at exit 70 and you'd be the one oddball car that was carrying on.
And then the other thing that people have talked about is that then the wineries on the North Fork have been able to preserve the open space even when they were transitioning from potatoes, which hasn't been as much the case for the South Fork, which has kept the open space here. But like you said, we have seen an influx of more people probably coming up from the South Fork or from the city, even post-COVID.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't want to get into sort of urban planning, partly because I don't really know anything about it. But yeah, if you turn a potato farm into a winery, into a vineyard, then per se, you've preserved open space. You maybe didn't do it because you wanted to preserve open space. You wanted a vineyard, but the side effect is it does preserve the open space. At the same time, ask people who are looking for a place to rent, can I find an apartment to rent, a one-bedroom apartment? There's serious limitations here.
Yes.
So people that we employ often live in Riverhead or farther up island where they can get a cheaper place to live and they commute back and forth.
Yeah, it's an issue with the area, and I think that the South Old Town is addressing that, or at least trying to address the needs.
No, everyone has talked about housing and how to address that out here. Because it was, from what I understand, even in the 80s and 90s, was pretty affordable. Really affordable.
Yeah. That's why we came up here.
What did we pay per acre for our land originally?
I don't remember.
4,000 or 5,000 an acre or something.
Maybe.
Crazy.
Okay.
I think
Speaking of things that have changed, we're doing this recording in Greenport. Greenport
has changed.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah.
What did you think of Greenport?
It was a little sketchy.
It was run down.
In the 80s and early 90s.
And like everywhere on an old fort, there really weren't any restaurants. I wouldn't say decent restaurants, but there just weren't that many restaurants, period. Now, you're spoiled for choice. We have friends who live right in Greenport, and they walk to wherever they want to go. It's a lovely town. They made a good choice.
Such a great place now.
Yeah.
Yes. And even now, just looking at the winery today, what would you recommend someone visiting there for the first time? Where should they start in terms of what type of wine, or is there one that really represents what you're all about?
I don't think that there's one wine per se. I mean, I think people have an opportunity when they come to Lenz to do different tasting flights. They change seasonally, so we give people an opportunity to try different things. If you're not interested in that particular one, you can make your own. We make a lot of different kinds of wine, and they're all good for different reasons at different times. People often ask me, what's your favorite? I mean, I love the cuvee. I love to have a glass of cuvee at the end of the day. Refreshing, light, delicious. But, for dinner, I'm going to have something else. So different things for different times. It depends what we're eating, depends what the temperature is outside. We also have different flights. Like we have a chocolate tasting flight. So we pair our wines with a particular chocolate. That's quite popular for people who are just learning about it. It's sort of a fun way to dive into it. I think that people should just come and feel comfortable coming into Lenz and learning about wine. We have really good staff that are very knowledgeable about different wines and can help everyone through their journey, learn about things.
Yes. And I don't know if you wanted to answer this, but is there anything that you feel that you've done that makes you stand out from other wineries on the North Fork that's unique to?
I think what we already talked about, the flip side of Chateau Cashmere. The one thing, you didn't ask the question, but I'm going to say this anyway. So people do ask, like, what's your favorite wine? A similar question is, what wine will the North Fork be best known for? And wine writers, many of them, have taken it into their head to say that whereas other people say it's Merlot, I believe it's going to be Cabernet Franc. They always have their pet theme, and that's one of the themes. But the more general point is that in the wine business, there's this French concept called terroir, and it's what's the right word I want to use here? It's a conceit. It's an idea that I don't particularly agree with, that a wine made in a certain place is completely unique to that place on earth. So you will hear people say things like, well, look at Burgundy, right? They make very few different wines there. Almost all the reds are Pinot Noir, and almost all the whites are Chardonnay. If you go to Bordeaux, there's a couple of key red wine varieties and a couple of key white wine varieties, but they don't make either Pinot Noir or Chardonnay in Burgundy. So there's this whole idea that the place defines what is best. I think what's unusual, it's true of the North Fork, but I'm going to use Lenz to illustrate the point. Like, we make Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon. What have I missed? Sparkling wine.
Pet Nat.
And we often do tastings where we taste these wines with the tasters blind tasting against top wines from France. Mm-hmm. And they come out with, equal scores. So I think what's actually extraordinary about the North Fork is you can make great wines of many different kinds mm-hmm. to a very high level. And that, I'll go back to what I said before, that's partly because the vineyard management techniques mm-hmm. have become better. Mm-hmm. You could go to Bordeaux and buy a famous chateau, pull all the grapes out and plant Chardonnay and make a fantastic Chardonnay. Because it's probably illegal in France. But, anyway, but your theme was what do we like best? What should people try? Mm-hmm. I think maybe the cute answer would be people should enjoy the incredible diversity of what you can make well mm-hmm. out here.
Yes, the amount of diversity and the quality of each of them. It's not just we make a wide range, but it's
to a high standard.
To a high standard, sure.
Yes. And then also, I think you now have a new generation stepping in as well with Thomas is it Spotteck?
Spotteck, yeah.
Continuing the work as well. How has that transition been?
Well, excellent. Thomas interned for us mm-hmm. quite a few years ago. And then he overlapped with Eric for the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. So he was the assistant winemaker under Eric. Then Eric retired. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, I hope Thomas will learn enough to be as good as Eric. Proven to be at least as good, let's say, as mm-hmm. Eric. And he's younger, and so he's got a lot more energy for experimentation and trying things. Mm-hmm. So he's been absolutely superb. Mm-hmm. And he's also played a couple of tricks on me, just like Eric used to. So, for example, we grow Pinot Noir, but we, over time, learned that we should use it just to make sparkling wine. The one or two times back in 1998 that we tried to make a red Pinot Noir was okay, but nothing special. But in, I think it was 2019, Thomas noticed that it was a very good vintage. No, it wasn't 19. It was, well, whatever the year was. Yeah, it probably was 19. He picked about half of the Pinot Noir for sparkling wine, but he had the pickers pick like cluster by cluster. Uh-huh. And they preserved all of the best-looking clusters and let them hang on the vines for another 2 weeks. Then we picked that and made a red Pinot Noir, and it was sensational. And he did something similar with Cabernet Franc, and he made a varietal Cabernet Franc, meaning 100%. And he didn't even tell me. I probably should have fired him theoretically.
But we really liked the wine.
Yeah, but it was excellent. So he's been very creative.
Yeah.
And we just could not be happier, actually.
And now, even looking forward, are there any future plans for any other, maybe expansions or other initiatives you might want to do in the future for the winery?
Not expansions. The one initiative that we have started taking, which I'll mention, it's a little bit technical, but if you look at a map of eastern Long Island and the North Fork, the North Fork kind of points from the southwest, like riverhead to the northeast at Orient, right? It's angled on a map. And you've got the two main highways, 25 and 48. And when they originally divvied up the land, the lots are perpendicular to the roads. So when people bought those lots, like the lot at Lenz, the lot we own over Oregon Road, they planted along the long axis of that. So the vineyards are planted roughly southeast to northwest. Now, in a perfect world, you would want your vineyards to be north-south, so that way the east-facing side of the vines get half of the sun, and the west-facing side of the vines get the afternoon side of the sun. So we actually have planted two vineyards where we pulled up vines, and instead of planting along the axis of the land, the plot of land, we've planted north-south. And so far, we did a block of Merlot like that, and we've done a block of Pinot Noir. The block of Merlot is now 7 or 8 years old, and it's sensational. Now, because things change over time, we're not 100% sure whether that's entirely due to the orientation of the rows, or if they're just newer, better clones, that you buy from the nurseries. Anyway,
time will tell.
Yeah, if I was starting over, I would plant all of my vineyard rows north-south. But if you look around, almost nothing is planted north-south except for our two experimental blocks.
Yes.
But so everything takes a long time in the wine business.
Yeah.
Like if somebody says, let's plant some Sauvignon Blanc, you say, oh, okay. First we have to order, and then you get it, then you plant it, then it's 4 years before you get, so before you actually have a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc to sell, it's probably 7 years from the day you said,
let's plant Sauvignon Blanc.
Let's have Sauvignon Blanc.
Yes. Yeah, it's not a quick change.
It's not a quick turnaround.
Yes.
You learn a certain amount of patience being a winery owner because, there's a storm coming. Not doing anything about it.
Yes.
This vintage turned out to be really bad. Okay, maybe
next year will be better.
I've learned to think in terms of rolling 7-year averages.
But overall, because people have talked about the change in taste for new generations and the change in what people consume, but how has business been over the years? And obviously we've continued to see more people visit here, but I think it's interesting just looking at how maybe the younger generation looks at wineries and the future of the business. And yeah,
I think that there are always fads in wines.
Yes.
For a while, rosé was all anyone could talk about. Sauvignon Blanc is really popular now. It changes from time to time. I'm seeing a lot of our customers coming in and asking for and really enjoying Chardonnay, which hasn't been that popular over the last couple of years because of all of the other ones.
15 years.
Yeah. So I think that there's always a fluctuation in tastes of what people are going for. I think we have a lot of guests that come to us who are really keen about learning about wine. And I think Lenz is unique in that we really talk about educating customers who come. So it's not about, we always used to say, it's not about the oompa bands and the hay rides. I mean, you're coming to enjoy wine and in a really pleasant setting and meet nice people. So I think that, we see a lot of people who come out and become wine club members as a result of, tasting our wines and joining into like the family in essence.
Yeah.
But I think what your question is predicated, I assume, partly on what one reads. You read an article in a newspaper like the Wall Street Journal that says younger people are not drinking as much. That's true. But there's still a lot that are. So part of the question is, if fewer people are drinking wine at all, and the ones who are drinking less of it, that's like the opposite of a rising tide that lifts all boats, right? That's a sinking tide that you sort of have to contend with. But then within that, you've got movement between varieties that people like, or the way they want to enjoy wine. You know, as Deborah just said, this is something that even 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, didn't exist. The idea that you would come to the North Fork, visit a winery with a few friends, sit outside, you know, do a tasting flight, maybe a glass of wine. That just didn't happen. So there's a whole consumption, dynamic that just never existed. It was always bottles that you took home and had with your dinner.
Yes.
So,
no, that's totally different.
Yeah, it's all changing. You have to try and keep up.
Yeah.
And I think just one other question in terms of just looking to the future, what are your hopes for the future? It doesn't have to be about the wine region, but just hopes for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line.
Well, that it remain as unspoiled as possible.
Yeah. I think that there's a really nice camaraderie amongst all of the wineries and vineyards out here. And I think that it's a really nice part of like what the North Fork is all about. And so I hope that will continue. I think it would.
Yes.
I mean, the North Fork isn't that big that it's going to grow that much more.
But can't. Really.
It can't.
Yeah, it can't. We're kind of the last.
I like to do a lot of sailing, and sailing in the Peconic Bays is an incredible joy. And most of us who sail here say and repeatedly say, there's no better place in the world to enjoy sailing than this. There may be one or two that are similar, but it's between the bays and the land and the animals, the turkeys, and the ospreys. That's another thing, just in terms of change. I can remember perhaps 30 years ago saying, look, that's an osprey. Now it's like, oh. No.
Yeah, they're
all over the
place.
place.
All over the place, yeah.
I won't go as far as to say they've become pests. They haven't, but they've gone from being quite rare to very common.
Yeah. Yes. It's a very special place out here.
Turkeys, too. I remember.
Turkeys.
You never used to see turkeys. Now they have to stop to let them cross the road.
It definitely. No, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and this wonderful winery you have out here. It was really a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you, Chris. We hope you'll come and visit.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 211 with Peter and Deborah Carroll. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.